All right, welcome back to your daily read aloud, The Wild Robot Escapes. We just started reading this book last time after we finished The Wild Robot, and so far not much has happened. We do know that a truck delivered Roz. We know that it's in the future because there are airships and robots everywhere. And what happened when Roz was dropped off, and where does she now live? Cadence?
In the city.
Okay.
No, in a house.
Okay, she went past through a city, and she lives out at a little house. And what do the people at the house do? Angie?
She got dropped off at a farm, and then they're asking, and then the farmers asking her to do work.
Okay, so she's going to live at a farm. It's Mr. Sharif, and he has two children, Jad and Jaya, and they've got a dog. I think his name was Oscar. Noah?
We ended off where he was, I guess, taking a tour.
Yeah, he told Roz to take her crate back, and he basically said, I can tell where you are everywhere on my property. I track you. And what?
That's going to be hard for him if he's going to leave.
Yeah, so if Roz wants to try to escape, he's tracking every move she makes. So that's difficult. Eric?
And we not think he, or Roz doesn't speak for anyone.
Okay, so far we have no indication that Roz remembers her former life, right? She's just back to plain Roz. Emma, last thing.
Does could she remember?
I don't know. We're going to find out. Really fast, I said last thing.
If she does remember how to communicate to animals, she might be able to communicate to Oscar.
Could be.
Maybe she's just acting.
Okay, shh. I should have only heard Dylan's voice. All right, so he said maybe she's just acting and pretending like she doesn't remember. All right, chapter 5 is called The Farm. Mr. Sharif turned and shouted, "Come here, Rambler!" A moment later, a pickup truck automatically rolled out from the garage. The truck pulled up to the man and the robot, its doors wide open, and they both climbed in. Rambler had a steering wheel, but Mr. Sharif sat back and let the truck drive itself. They followed the driveway behind the house, across the backyard, past trees and hedges, and suddenly they were surrounded by farm buildings. The buildings were different sizes and shapes, all white walls with gray roofs, and they were so tightly packed together that you could hardly tell where one building ended and the next one began. Some were splattered with mud. Others had holes and loose boards. The entire place smelled like grass and manure. All right, what's manure? Madeline? Yep. Mr. Sharif pointed out each building to Roz. There was the enormous dairy barn, the milking parlor, the workshop, and the machine shed. Smaller sheds were scattered all around. Rambler drove out from the building and down the back side of the hill into a wide sweep of farmland. A fence lined this part of the driveway, and behind the fence was a sprawling, rolling pasture, lush with tall grass and a few leafy trees, where a herd of cows were grazing. The cows swished their tails and chewed their cud and followed the truck with their eyes. One of them let out a long moo. "This is a dairy farm," said Mr. Sharif. "So these cows are the queens around here. Your whole world now revolves around them. Understand?" "I understand," said Roz, as she stared at a young calf who was staring right back at her. They rolled past the herd of cows, past clumps of wildflowers, past a quiet pond, past birds and field mice and bumblebees. The driveway cut through a row of trees on its way out to the crop fields, which were flat and square and covered with bright green sprouts. Hilltop Farm was bursting with life, but it had seen better days. Patches of weeds and bare dirt were spreading across the fields. Broken down farm machines and piles of junk were strewn across the grounds. Thick tangles of brush were creeping in from the edges of the property. They drove all the way out to the farthest fields to a little roundabout at the very end of the driveway. Rambler shut off its engine, and the man and the robot sat and looked at the countryside. Far off, where the land met the sky, a train quietly slid along its tracks and disappeared to the north. Then all was still. "This farm needs help," Mr. Sharif said at last. "It's been in my family for generations, and I don't want to lose it. But I can't do farm work anymore, not with this bad leg. That's why you're here. They say Razum robots can learn to do almost every kind of job, and you'll have to do almost every kind of job on this farm." "I understand," said Roz. We've had auto machines for ages, Mr. Sharif went on, but we didn't need a robot until my wife died. Those last words hung in the air for a while. What does that mean? They hung in the air. Hudson?
Like they kept thinking about it, or like they didn't forget it.
Okay, so if something's hanging in the air, you're not really talking about it for a minute. It's like no one really wants to say anything. Cadence?
It's kind of like when you have too much on your mind, that's like the only thing you can think about.
Right, so no one really knew what to say next. Madeline?
This is kind of like Wall-E, because all the people they're almost like lazy and they have robots do everything for them.
Okay, good connection. Noah?
Hanging in the air is kind of like someone says it and you guys go still because he's like kind of sad. Like it just stays there and you guys like think about it and then move on.
Yeah, good. Emma, last thing.
Everything just goes silent.
Yeah, good. All right, so the last words hung in the air for a while. The silence was finally broken by a low rumble of thunder. A storm was approaching. Tornado season was still months away, but in farm country, any storm could become dangerous. Let's go home, said Mr. Sharif. Rambler started its engine and drove back up the long driveway. By the time they reached the farm buildings, a steady rain was falling, and the cows were in the barn. This is for you, said Mr. Sharif, and he handed Roz her own computer. That controls the farm's equipment, and it's got all the information you'll need to work here. Do you know how to use a computer? Yes, I know how to use a computer. Roz had never used a computer before, but she instinctively knew what to do. Clearly, the robot was designed to work with technology. Study up tonight and start farming tomorrow, said Mr. Sharif. You can stay in the machine shed with the other machines. Perhaps could I stay in the barn with the cows, said Roz. My whole world revolves around them. The man smirked and said, I like the way you think, Roz. Okay. Any comments or ideas about that? I'll take one from Eric.
He's going to...
You talking about Roz?
What?
Roz?
Yeah.
Roz is a girl.
Oh. She's gonna go to the cows, go with them, and then until she figures out their language, and then they're gonna help her escape.
Okay, maybe. Noah?
He said, everything revolves around the farm, and those are part of the farm, and he's like, I like the way you think. But at the same time, she couldn't remember the languages, so she couldn't know the language to talk with them.
So she's like, I need to find some animals I can talk to. All right, let's see. Chapter 6 is called The Monster. The cows were munching hay in their stalls when the big barn door slid open and a mechanical monster stomped in from the rain. The creature marched down the center aisle, her footsteps echoing through the cavernous space. So cavernous means big. Until she found an empty corner, and there she stood in the shadows as a storm began to rage outside. Everybody listened as the rain poured and the wind howled and the thunder cracked. By midnight, the storm had blown over, and there was only a gentle sprinkling on the roof. But the herd couldn't rest with that monster lurking in the corner. Cows began quietly mooing to each other. What is the monster doing? She hasn't moved in hours. I bet she's waiting to eat us in our sleep. The cows gasped at this horrible thought, and then an old cow named Annabelle tried to calm down the herd. Relax, everyone, she said. There were monsters like this at my last farm, and they never ate any cows. Come to think of it, they never ate anything at all. If this monster has never eaten anything at all, she must be awfully hungry by now, said a cow named Tess. I saw the farmer driving the monster around in his truck, said a calf named Lily. I don't think he would have done that if she were dangerous. Nobody knew quite what to think of the strange creature in their midst. I think the monster is harmless. I think the monster is unnatural. I think the monster is moving. The herd fell silent as the monster marched out from the shadows and into the middle of the barn. And then the monster did the impossible. She did the unthinkable. She spoke to the cows in the language of the animals. I am not a monster. I am a robot. My name is Roz. Chapter 7, The Robot's Story. Quick question.
Annabelle is my mom's name.
Oh, okay. The Robot's Story. None of the cows could believe that this monster, this robot, this machine had just spoken to them in the animal language. They stared at her, nervously shifting in their stalls, wondering what she would do next. What Roz did next was simple. She told the truth. She stood in the middle of the barn and shared her story with the herd. I spent my first year of life on a remote wild island, Roz began. So, does she remember?
Yes.
Wait, is that Roz the Roz from the island?
I did not know how I got there. I only knew that I wanted to survive. So, I studied the island animals to see how they survived. And a surprising thing happened. Their sounds and movements started making sense to me. I was learning the language of the animals. Even when I could speak to them, the animals wanted nothing to do with me. But that changed when I discovered an orphaned gosling. The poor little thing would have died on his own, so I cared for him and adopted him as my son. His name is Brightbill. A murmur spread throughout the herd. When the animals saw me caring for Brightbill, they finally accepted me. I was no longer alone. I had friends and a family and a home. Life was good. Until the Rico robots arrived. They came in their sleek white airship to take me away. And when I resisted, they became violent. The animals defended me. They fought bravely and destroyed the Ricos. But I was badly damaged in the fighting. I needed repairs, and I could not get them on the island. So, the animals loaded my broken body into the airship, and it took me far away from my home. Lily the calf poked her head through the railing and said, "Well, what about Brightbill?" "My son is smart and tough, and he has a good flock," said Roz. "I think he will be okay without me." "Where were you taken?" said Tess. "I was taken back to the factory where I was made. The factory is run by a crew of robot workers called the Makers. When I arrived, they put me in a room filled with other broken robots. Some robots were completely ruined, and the Makers immediately sent them away. But those of us with working computer brains were given a test." "What kind of test?" said Lily. "The Makers simply asked us questions. They asked us how we had become damaged. They asked us how we would respond to different emergencies. They asked us to identify certain sounds and smells and objects. Robots who answered every question correctly were repaired. All others were destroyed. In the wilderness, I camouflaged my body to survive. In the robot factory, I camouflaged my personality to survive. I pretended to be a perfectly normal robot. I did not say that I had adopted a goose, or that I could speak with animals, or that I had resisted the Ricos. I said what I had to say to pass the test, and it worked." "Good for you, Roz," shouted Tess, and the other cows smiled. "The Makers shut me off, and when I awoke, my body was fixed, and I was on this farm. Now, like all of you, I belong to Mr. Sharif." The cows stopped smiling. Everyone was quiet. And then old Annabelle spoke up. "I was taken from my friends and family too," she said. "They're back on the farm where I was born. I still think about them every day." "It is difficult to be apart from our loved ones," said the robot. "You know, Roz, things could be worse," said Tess. "At least on this farm, you're still surrounded by nature." "Yes, things could be worse." The robot's eyes brightened a little. "But I am not safe here. If any human ever learns who I really am, they will have me destroyed. And that is why, when the time is right, I will try to escape." All right, we are ready for Chapter 8, The Computer. Inside the barn, the lights were low, the sounds were hushed, the night slowly wore on. A few cows were chewing hay, but most were resting peacefully. Our robot had returned to her corner. The soft glow of the computer screen lit up her face as she studied farming. She learned about the herd, about the pasture and the fields, about the native plants and wildlife, about the seasons and the climate and the weather, about the machines and the buildings and the fences and the tools and all the dairy equipment. Every detail was perfectly remembered in the robot's computer brain. And, in a single night, Roz became a farmer. If only all learning was that easy, right? Chapter 9, The First Day. At dawn, the cows began to stir. One by one, they walked out the side door, across the muddy barnyard, and into the parlor for a quick milking before heading down to the pasture. They followed the same routine every morning like clockwork. However, this morning, the cows were joined by a robot. With her computer brain full of farming knowledge, Roz was ready for her first day on the job. She stomped through the tall wet grass, and her head slowly turned as she scanned the scenery. The sun was rising, the fog was lifting, the cows were grazing. And then The whole world seemed to flip upside down. Before Roz knew what was happening, she was on her back, looking up at the sky. A strong stench filled the air. Our robot had slipped on cow dung. The herd erupted in laughter. Tess called out, "Welcome to Hilltop Farm, Roz," which brought another round of snorts and moos. "You'll have to get used to cow patties and to laughter," said old Annabelle, strolling over. So a cow patty is exactly what you think, okay? "Not much happens around here, so we're always eager to laugh." "I understand," said Roz. "I like laughing too." And she forced out an awkward, "Ha, ha, ha!" Then the robot stood up, wiped her feet, and continued exploring the farm. But she was more careful to watch where she stepped. The fields and buildings and fences were all in need of Roz's attention. But her most urgent task was to fix the broken farm machines. The herding machine was designed to roll through the pasture and look after the cows while they grazed. But it had gotten stuck in the mud and was becoming a popular hangout for birds. The field machine was gigantic, like a house on wheels. It was designed to roam the fields, planting and fertilizing and harvesting the feed crops. But it had ground to a halt weeks ago and was now just collecting dust in a far corner of the property. The drone was a small flying machine with a special camera attached to its underside. It was designed to fly above the farm and keep an eye on the whole place. But it came crashing down when a mob of crows attacked it in flight. Other broken machines were hidden within clumps of weeds, and still more were waiting for repairs in the shed. The peaceful morning was suddenly jolted by the sound of power tools as Roz began fixing the machines. Thanks to her robotic strength and smarts, she made excellent progress. The hours flew by, the machines rumbled back to life, and the farm began buzzing with activity. At sunset, Rambler came bouncing down the driveway with the Sharifs in the front and Oscar in the back. So Rambler's the truck, and Oscar's the dog. "How's it going, Roz?" said Mr. Sharif, leaning out his window. The children giggled and waved from their seats. The dog sniffed the breeze. "It is going well," said Roz in a robotic voice. "Many of the machines are working again." "I see that." Mr. Sharif gazed up at the drone circling high overhead. "We thought we'd come out and check on you, but it looks like you're doing fine, so we'll stay out of your way. Keep up the good work, Roz." As the truck started rolling up the driveway, Oscar looked back at Roz and barked, "You smell like cow patties." He was right. The robot was filthy, and she finished her first day as a farmer by scrubbing herself with soap and water. Last chapter. Shh. Reader, I don't want to bore you with every detail of our robot's farm routine. Many of her tasks were incredibly dull. Others were quite unpleasant. I'll just say that on any given day, Roz might have to be a mechanic or a veterinarian or a gardener or a plumber or a cleaner or a landscaper or a carpenter or an electrician or all of the above. Farm life kept Roz very busy indeed. Of course, she did have help. You already know about some of the machines, but the entire farm was equipped with technology that made life easier for everyone. Doors and gates opened automatically. The cows wore electronic collars that kept track of their health automatically. When a cow's udders were full, she simply had to stroll into the parlor, where she'd be milked by gentle machines automatically. All that milk was piped into storage tanks and cooled and bottled automatically. Once the milk truck was loaded up, it drove away and made its deliveries automatically. Mr. Sharif managed the business side of the farm. He dealt with customers and handled money and ordered supplies. And he did all that from the comfort of his home office. Now that he had a robot to do all the farm work, he hardly ever left the house. Roz was more content than she had ever expected to be. Most of her time was spent outdoors with animals under the wide open sky. Even while laboring in the fields, she could always stop to smell the flowers, look up at the clouds, feel the cool air drifting out of the trees. And yet, Roz was living two lives. When she had the farm to herself, she could play with the calves or run through the grass or chat with the wildlife. But whenever the Sharifs were near, Roz had to pretend to be a normal robot. She could never let them know who she really was. And actually, we do have time for another. Chapter 11, The Stragglers. Wild geese are known for migrating in the autumn and the spring. But exactly when a flock migrates, it's up to its members. Some flocks choose to fly early in the season. Others straggle far behind. And it was one of those straggling flocks that caught the attention of our robot. Honk, honk, honk. The geese were heard before they were seen. Their honking voices echoed across the farm, and then the flock appeared above the fields, flying in a wobbly V formation. They glided over the pasture and plucked down into the pond. Oh, I seem to have a lot of students that want to speak. Cadence.
That could be Brightville.
Yeah, Brightville.
Could be.
Brightville.
Shh, Emma.
Brightville's flock.
Well, we can hope so. Noah, last thing.
It can't be Brightville because they already made it. That's the Stragglers.
Well, we'll see. None of them were very concerned as Roz approached. The geese had seen similar creatures on other farms, and they knew there was nothing to fear. But they were about to learn that our robot was very different from the others. "Hello, geese," said Roz. "Welcome to Hilltop Farm." The geese froze. They stared at Roz with suspicious eyes. And then the biggest goose slowly swam over. "I've come across plenty of monsters like you," he said, "but I've never met one who could talk. I am not a monster. I am a robot. My name is Roz." The goose scratched his head. "Well, it's nice to meet you, Roz the robot," he said at last. "My name is Wingtip, and this is my flock." Roz gave a friendly wave, and soon the flock was gathering around, curious to meet this odd character. As you can imagine, the geese were shocked to learn that Roz had a goose for a son. They asked her all kinds of questions about Brightville, and about her old life on the island, and about her new life on the farm. Then Roz asked them a question of her own. "Do you think Brightville's flock would ever come this way on their migration?" "Doubtful," said Wingtip. "Sounds like his flock takes the eastern flyways. They'd never come this far west." The robot slumped with disappointment. "However, we geese are full of surprises," added Wingtip. "I'll promise you this, Roz. If I ever meet Brightville, we'll point him in your direction." The talk was interrupted by giggling and barking. The children were taking their dog for a walk. Roz couldn't be seen chatting with geese, so she whispered a quick goodbye to her new friends and went back to work. And when she looked down at the pond later that day, she saw that the flock was gone. All right, and we will end there. All right, I will see you guys later.